the hurry that I was trying to put down. I mean, I'd read John Mark Comer's The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I'd read that, done all that. And yet what I noticed is that patience, I was being invited into patience by being in awe of God is patient with me. I was more motivated to patience in my parenting, in my work life, as a daughter, because on the other side of my own scurrying and hurrying to be less hurried, I found a God that was so patient and kind and slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. Like, Ashlee, I'll just wait for you. I'm not going anywhere. Do what you got to do. And it was healing in my sense of who God was. Because in shaping God in my own image, I thought God was rushed too.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Digital Examine podcast. I'm your host, Jay, and so glad that you're joining us today. I'm assuming you've had a similar experience as me, maybe around the Thanksgiving dinner table or a holiday party where you get caught up in a conversation with a family member or several family members or coworkers and colleagues that isn't going the way you wanted it to go. Maybe that topic that you just absolutely dread, somebody has mentioned it, brought it up. Maybe it's politics or religious tension or global economic issues or parenting philosophies or whatever it might be. And things begin to get chaotic. It gets a little crazy, a little wild. There's antagonism and anger, and it eventually boils over, and it's just what was supposed to be a nice meal or a fun, casual get together has now turned into this sort of war zone. And even if you can't relate to those scenarios, whether it's the holiday party or a family meal, just open your phone, open your social media app of choice, and very quickly you begin to realize this is in many ways the world in which we live, a war zone, sort of chaotic back and forth of just anger and antagonism and who's right and who's wrong and cancel culture and on and on. Everyone's got an opinion, everyone's shouting, everyone's screaming. And in those scenarios and in those moments and situations, I have often found myself knowing that I have a voice, knowing that I might actually have something to say that might actually be helpful, and yet just feeling so drowned out by the chaos. And most of the time, what I want to do in those moments is tap out. Is it even worth saying anything? Seems too exhausting to try to speak into the fray. But speaking goodness to a world that is broken is in large part what it means to carry the image of God. That God spoke a good world into being in the beginning. He literally spoke it over and over again in the Genesis creation story. It tells us that the Lord God said, "Let there be," and then something beautiful and good. Today, I am talking with my friend Ashlee Eiland. Ashlee is a teacher, a Bible teacher. She's an author whose work focuses on helping people build bridges back to God and to one another. She was formerly the co-lead pastor of Mars Hill Bible Church in West Michigan. And again, she's the author of several books, including her latest, Say Good, which I've had a chance to read a couple of times now. And today, in this conversation, we get into all of that. How can we actually speak goodness into a world in need, find our voice, and experience God's patient presence with us? So I think you're going to be thoroughly encouraged and inspired, and actually have a couple of maybe practical takeaways that might reframe how you think about the noise of your life and your world. So without further ado, here is my conversation with my friend, Ashlee Eiland. Ashlee, thank you so much for joining us on the Digital Examine podcast.
Jay, it's an honor to join you for the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you sent me the book Say Good sort of leading up to the release of it, and I had like the great joy and honor of reading it and endorsing it. And I remember when I was reading it, I thought to myself, "Oh my gosh, like it's rare that a book is this timely, you know?" It just resonated so much with how I so often feel. Is it worth saying anything? You know, like just
Yeah.
shouting and screaming into the ether. You've got this like really cool sort of paradigm that you hit on pretty early in the book. And you say that talking about God creating the world, and you say that if God at the end of 6 days of work could call that which was spoken very good, because he speaks all of creation into being. And then you say, then the words that roll up from our gut through our tight and dry throats and off the tips of our twisted tongues must mirror not just the urgency of human instinct, but what is good, even very good. And that was like such a breath of fresh air when I read that. I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is a part of Imago Day, like using my voice to speak good into the world, because in the beginning of the biblical story, that is God's first action, to speak goodness into the world. I want to begin this conversation by asking you to just talk about the tension that most of us feel these days, where it feels like either too exhausting or just completely pointless to speak up about anything. You know, like what does the Genesis creation story specifically teach us about speaking good into the world and why that matters?
I feel like the Genesis story might be the subject of some concentrated writing or something I speak about in the future, because the more I think about it, the more I fall in love with this idea. I think, Jay, that words are way more powerful than we give them credit for. And because we were meant to mirror the Imago Day, sometimes we waste our words, and the economy of our words gets spent on things that aren't pointed toward the end of kingdom minded creation. And so I think some of that exhaustion that I've learned I feel comes from having expended so much energy speaking to things that maybe weren't mine to say. I love in the beginning of Genesis, from the get go, verse 1 and 2, there's this idea that the earth was like dark and formless, and there was this vast expanse, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Sometimes I feel like that exhaustion comes from us seeing the expanse into which we are speaking as too big and spiritless. It's almost like we forget that God's spirit is there. And so for me, I get so tired thinking I have to change this myself. It is on me to say something so profound that's going to get so many likes and shares or retweets or whatever we're doing on Threads now as a platform. Like, it's my job to do this. And I forget that the Spirit of God is hovering. So I think that's where part of my exhaustion comes from, is that forgetfulness. But then I feel like another part of that exhaustion comes from me thinking too little of myself and the power that I do hold in being able to speak good into the world. I love my favorite proverb right now, did not make the book. I feel like I fell in love with it on the other side of turning the manuscript in, was Proverbs 18:22, and it's Eugene Peterson's Message version. And he writes that proverb like this: words kill, words give life. They're either poison or fruit. You choose. So that tells me there's no such thing as a neutral word. And it also tells me that myself as an individual, as one part of humanity, I actually have the power to give life to things. And equally so, I have the power to destroy. You know, there's this expanse. We get overwhelmed by all that is out there, and we forget the spirit and in God's presence. And I also think sometimes I think too small of what I've been tasked to do as part of humanity. There's this sense of kind of belittling my own creation story and this insecurity that creeps in. No, I actually, because of who I am, because of what I believe about how God created humanity, I have the power, and I've been given agency to give life, to people and to things and to situations, or I've been given power to lend to their destruction. And that's such a heavy and yet holy burden to wear. So that is exhausting. It's exhausting when we waste the economy of our words. It's exhausting when we feel like it's all on us to change things. And it's exhausting when we forget who we actually are and what our words have the power to do.
There's so much there, I think, for us to ponder. I want to go sort of to the front end of what you said. Are there any practical things like practices or just small little rhythms or habits in your life that have been helpful in any way in terms of helping you notice and remember that when you look out into the vast expanse, the void, that it's not just a void for you to conquer, but that the Spirit of God is hovering there. I think a lot of us listening can relate to that feeling. Has there been anything practical that you've done that's been helpful to remind yourself of that?
Yeah, actually, and it's can't remember which pillar I put this in the book, but I've started thinking about myself as a literal part of a body. We talk about the body of Christ, point back to Paul's kind of illustration there a lot, but I don't think I took it seriously until recently and kind of constructing and putting together what that means for my relationship to other people. I have taken great solace and comfort in knowing that my part is important, but my part is not the whole. And so when I look at the world around me, and I mean, pick a headline, there is such ease in becoming overwhelmed by any of it. I have to remember that there are other parts of this body that have been put together in this great cloud of witnesses before me in this current generation of creation and humanity right now, and who will come after me. Not even in my children or my children's children, but maybe even beyond that. God has almost like said, nope, this is what I need for you to do. And there's someone else, maybe somewhere else, that has kind of this assignment and is doing good work. And you might intercept that good work, playing your part of the body, and you might not. And it might be a part that many people forget is so crucial, also most important to kind of this work in the world. My practice has been, Ashlee, you are a part. You are a part. You are part of a body, and you need the other parts of the body in order to understand this interdependence and full functioning of what it means to be humanity together. So you can't pull out. You can't just sit back and do nothing. So that helps me engage, but it also helps me realize my own limitations, and not as a sense of ego that says like, oh, get in the back seat, but as a sense of interdependence and a call to recognize interdependence versus independence in kind of this Western culture in which we swim. So that honestly has been it for me. I don't have like two, three more profound things to say, but it's been humbling to see myself truly as a part and to realize the really beautiful implications of that as I work and am on mission in the world.
I love the very compelling and way of Jesus call to essentially union, to see ourselves in union with God and with others. It's so important, I think, particularly in this day and age when the cultural air we breathe is one of individualism and autonomy. The greatest threat Americans think they face is a threat to their self sort of centered autonomy.
That's
Do not
right.
tell me how to live my life. And you mentioned the pillars, and I want to ask you about that in a moment. But along those lines, I think some of that self-centered, individualistic, autonomous sort of way of living life has in part created this sort of culture of reactivity. And you've got this really poignant thing that you write in the book. You say that we cannot be thoughtful and wise while microwaving our most precious material for either public or private consumption. A steady diet of reactivity warps the hard won wrestling, not just between the voice and the content, but between that voice and the soul that it represents. There's like so much packed into that line, but I think most of us can resonate with that. my temptation often is to just microwave my reaction or my reactivity to whatever the hot button issue might be. Can you give us like some practical ways? Because I think a lot of us listening, we can feel that, and when we're done listening to this podcast, we're going to open up our social media of choice and just start scrolling and then reacting. Give us like maybe one or two practical ways to disentangle ourselves from that sort of microwaved reactivity. Like, is there anything you've done, maybe even like with your smartphone or social media apps, that have been helpful to you?
Yeah, I love this question because it's a question that I need to answer for myself regularly and like reframe and retool. I tell my staff and I tell friends, and I use this language often, Jay. I am a crock pot. I'm not a microwave. And so I know that about myself. I know that for the deep well of me to kind of come forth, I need time. And yet I'm also kind of privy and I'm tempted to kind of play into the what I want people to know I'm listening and paying attention. I want people to know that I'm relevant, that I'm like the first to respond to something. That's a real honest instinct that rises up in me. I want to be the first to respond, to be ahead of a thought, and that's part of the downside of some people calling you a thought leader. It's like, okay, in order to be a thought leader, you have to lead in thought. So I've done I've done three things that have really helped me. A couple of them have to do with my social media, my smartphone. The first is to lengthen the time between the input and the response, to elongate it. So what that might mean for me is I see a news headline or I see a post that I really like, and I instantly turn off my phone, lock it, and put it away. Because that gives me time to actually run through what I'm thinking, and not just the content of what I'm thinking, but the motive behind it. Why am I instantly crafting a few words for an Instagram post? Like, why am I doing that? Is it because I'm leaning into a teaching gift and I truly have this really healthy desire to use that as a platform for teaching and co-discipleship? Or is it because I really care that what people think of me? So there's something about having an input and going against the grain and shutting the phone off and putting it away that's been really helpful for me. It's counterintuitive. It's really difficult. I have to catch myself doing it oftentimes, but that's been a really helpful one, lengthen the time between input and response. The second, Jay, and this is for in-person conversation, if I hear something and someone asks me a question and it feels like a question that I can respond to and give wisdom or leadership to, I have to be honest with myself. And I love the three words, I don't know. I don't know. Even if I have an opinion, even if I have an opinion that I really love, I have gotten into the practice of admitting, first and foremost, that I don't really know. I think, I respond, I craft, but for me and the person that I'm with, to say I don't know leads with a humility that isn't always instinctual to me. It's an admission that sometimes feels like confession, and sometimes it feels embarrassing. But I have found that saying I don't know oftentimes brings the heat down if there is a level of heat in the conversation that I know is not good for where we're headed. And for me, it's a practice. It's a spiritual practice to help put my ego in check or what's showing up that's unhelpful to that interaction or that relationship. So that's number two. Doesn't involve a smartphone, but involves like a sense of like self-examination. And that leads to the third kind of practice is self-interrogation. So this is kind of old school, but every morning, somewhere between 5:30 Eastern time, I'm trying to get up, and my first move after drinking my mushroom coffee or whatever it is for the day is to break out a journal and practice some form of the examine. And that's asking questions of the day that's past, the day that's ahead of me. And I feel like specific questions I'm asking as it relates to content and hot button issues. Ashlee, what is that touching aside from your sense of opinion. And I'll be really honest. For example, the topic around abortion touches something for me that's deeper than where I land on either side of a line. And I've told this story before, but it's because my family story and the way my children, at least one of my children, have come to my family is through adoption. And so that kind of grazed the lines for me. And so whenever I hear a heated discussion or read something really inflammatory around abortion, pro-choice, pro-life, oftentimes I'll use that time in the morning to write out what else it touches for me and ask God to speak to me in the places where I don't have words yet. But for me, asking what other layers are there to the things that I feel most reactive to help me go to a deeper level. And whether I take that to my spiritual director or my therapist or my spouse or a trusted spiritual friend, that helps me look a little bit beneath the surface in areas where my reactions to headlines on social media or my smartphone kind of keep me shallow.
I want to give us a moment to pause here. And if it's safe to do so, I want to ask you to slow your body down, begin to take some deep breaths, and ponder and consider some of the things that Ashlee just said. Slowing down enough, extending the time between consumption of content and your potential response. Maybe you saw something this morning in the news or on your social media feed that just felt like everything in your body wanted to react to. Think about the phrase, "I don't know." What would it look like for you in moments of reactivity to take a deep breath and ask yourself, what if the actual healthy response right now is to embrace the reality that I don't know? Think about what Ashlee said about self-interrogation, journaling, practicing the examine, which is such a big part of these conversations. So whatever you feel compelled to ponder most deeply, whether it's extending that time between consuming content and responding, or embracing that phrase, "I don't know," or a recommitment to self-interrogation, to taking time every day to slow down enough to examine your life with God. Ponder what the Spirit of God might be pulling you to, and make a commitment as you take these deep breaths in God's presence to take those next steps in the hours or the days and the weeks, months, and years to come. Yeah, Ashlee, that's so rich. As I'm listening to you talk about, elongating or extending that time between the content you consume and then responding to that content, as I think about you embracing the humility of saying, "I don't know," or self-interrogation, journaling, practicing the examine. It strikes me these are all ways to counterintuitively, in many ways, slow down in a world that is constantly rushed and hurried and frenzied. In Say Good, you briefly tell the story of giving up hurry for Lent one
Yeah.
year,
Yeah.
and you're describing that story, and you say sometimes this step or this next step we all want to take is actually a pause, and sometimes the answer to forward momentum will be no, not no followed by an explanation or a rationale, and not necessarily never, just no, not right now. So I want to ask you about that experience, that Lenten experience. How did giving up hurry and embracing the no of that season affect you, inform you, and shape you? Specifically, like, did it help you hear more clearly the voice of God?
I won't give up hurry for Lent again anytime soon. It was, it was, It was tough. What I will say, and just being straight up and honest, it increased my impatience and my frustration. It's almost like, every so often, maybe once or twice a year, I clean out the junk drawer in our kitchen. And what happens is I get really excited about this project, and inevitably in the middle of it, I regret doing it because it looks messier than it ever did, all stuffed in a drawer. And things are splayed kind of all over the counter or my kitchen table. And it gets messier before it gets better. That's what giving up hurry for Lent felt like. The frustration and the tension and the impatience felt splayed everywhere. I felt like the worst version of myself because it was that's the forming piece. I think when we think of formation, oftentimes we think of this really like this something that feels easy and like really enjoyable and pleasant. And I think it feels more like kneading bread. Like it feels more like something that is rough and tough. And so hurry was being worked out of me. And as hurry was being worked out of me, so was the frustration. So was the patience that was being externalized. I felt like in relationship to the voice of God in that season, Jay, God almost seemed silent. And I realized kind of on the other side of the season that God felt silent because I was hearing more of myself as the hurry was being worked out. I heard more internal dialogue. I was combating more of my own voice. And yet, what I noticed, and I could get emotional talking about this, is that I sense God being so patient with me. The hurry that I was trying to put down, I mean, I'd read John Mark Comer's The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I'd read that, done all that. And yet, what I noticed is that patience, I was being invited into patience by being in awe God is patient with me. I was more motivated to patience in my parenting, in my work life, as a daughter, because on the other side of my own scurrying and hurrying to be less hurried, I found a God that was so patient and kind and slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. Like, Ashley, I'll just wait for you. I'm not going anywhere. Do what you got to do. And it was healing in my sense of who God was, because in shaping God in my own image, I thought God was rushed too. That season of giving hurry up for Lent, I found a God that was so patient with me. In my formation has paid dividend. Would I do it again? Maybe not. Maybe not this upcoming Lent. Maybe give me a few years to like re-engage and like in a different season. Um, but it was one of the most formative Lenten seasons I can remember, and I'm forever grateful for it.
Thank you for sharing that. Often when I ask not just guests on this podcast, but different people in my life, hey, you went through this season, you implemented this practice or whatever, and how did that help you hear the voice of God? And this is a beautiful thing. Usually the response is something about the actual voice of God. But I think what you just shared with us is so profoundly freeing and liberating in some ways, because essentially, if I were to summarize or paraphrase what you just said, it's essentially you didn't really hear the voice of God. You experienced his patient presence with you. And that's resonant with me because most of the time, my experience of God is not the clarity of words he speaks, it's the clarity of his patient, loving presence, in ways that are very hard to describe with words. And usually I go to God like a vending machine, I'm going to put in my quarter, press B6, and then he's going to give me my answer to the problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And what he typically gives is like, no, I'm not going to give you an answer to your problem. I'm going to give you myself. I'm here. Just like you said, I'm here with you, for you. And because of that, you're going to be okay. I love that thought. It's such a gift what you just gave all of us who are listening. I want to go back to, again, using our voice. And this is so much, the book is framed this way. So really, I want to encourage our listeners, if they've not read Say Good, just go pick up the book and deep dive into this. But could you, for a moment, you've got these really helpful pillars, the pair pillars that you frame the book with. And you describe these pillars as pillars that help us discern what burdens are ours to carry and what stories are ours to tell. It's been a helpful paradigm for me to think about, like, when and how and what exactly I can and should speak into the world. So the pillars are passion, accountability, influence, and relationship. Without giving away the whole book, could you just give people a little bit of a taste, like what you mean by those pillars, in terms of helping us discern when to say good?
Sure. I'll give a little kind of commercial for each one. So passion, I misunderstood passion is like, what are my hobbies? What do I like spending my time doing? And I think in researching and studying for the book, I came to this understanding of passion based on its root sense. And I talk about the definition of passion, the origins of it being passio in the Greek, and that meaning suffering. We've heard of the passion of the Christ. I think that's helped me reframe my understanding of Jesus's death, burial, resurrection, and ascension, not as something that he had to do, but he chose to suffer because of love. And I feel like, and there's all sorts of theological things we could talk about, and I could probably use better language there, but for us, the implications for us listening is that passion isn't about your hobby, it's a holy grace given to you. It's a holy grace given to you and maybe a few other people that you know, some that you probably don't, to endure through something, to suffer through a specific idea or a circumstance. Again, I'll go back to adoption. Not everyone is called to adopt as part of their family story, but adoption is a passion for my husband and myself. And there's this really interesting thing that happens. We say yes to anything involving our kid's adoption story or enter into it, and it doesn't feel scary. It's heartbreaking at times, and it's painful, but we enter into it with a sense of fearlessness that I really can only attribute to God's grace in our lives. So that's what distinguishes passion from kind of anything else that we talk about, something we care about, something that we like doing. What are the things that you feel that you've been kind of able to endure in a holy sense? You're like, I don't know why, like when I talk about this thing or when I do this, everyone else seems to have a hard time with it, but I feel like I'm graced to do this. That might be kind of where your passion lies. I think we have an interesting relationship with accountability in the American West because, like you were saying at the top of the conversation, we don't like anyone to tell us that we can't do something in service of or kind of out of our own autonomy. And I feel like I'm recapturing accountability. I think about in the Gospels where Jesus sends out his disciples. And I didn't put this in the book either. I wish I had. But he sends them out not one at a time to different regions. He sends them out in pairs. And I'm going, wait, like the economics of that, it could have been way more. He could have gotten a lot more done. A lot more ground may have been covered if he sent them out one at a time. But he didn't. He sent them in pairs. I think there's something about accountability that keeps us and who we are called to be in our pursuit of Christ likeness, keeps us on track because there's someone else there. My grandmother used to ask me, Ashlee, you need someone in your life who can tell you about yourself. And not just all the wonderful, filled, anointed things that you do. No, not those things. The person in your life that can tell you, Ashlee, you have strayed from the path. In love and out of interest for who God has called you to be, you have strayed. You have broccoli in your teeth. Who are those people? We don't like that conversation. We don't like having to name people or having people accompany us in that way. And yet, the beauty of having someone else on the path, going back to this idea of the disciples being sent two by two, is that there's also someone there to give testimony to what has happened. It's not just this reliance on you being able to tell the story. There's also someone else who can be like, yeah, that actually did happen. I can vouch for that. So accountability, I want to reframe it through the book as not just a sense of negative accountability, like who's going to get us in trouble, kind of in lending toward this cancel culture that we're all familiar with. I'm interested in accountability as being an opportunity to give testimony to what God's doing in and through our lives. That's kind of the accountability bit. Influence, I mean, as most people can imagine, it's kind of been warped to be defined by how many people are visibly following you on social media or go to your church or whatever kind of metric we like to assign to this idea of American progress, and couching it in our definition as influence being anywhere God has placed you to be as an opportunity for kingdom good. There might be two people in that space, and yet it is a space that is assigned divinely to you. So are we seeing and are we accepting this invitation to spatial stewardship and putting on our sense of influence and being the fullness of who we were created to be in those spaces, whether they're visible or not? And actually seeing the deception in some of the spaces that we think are the most influential that God actually didn't call us to. The Lord did not say, Ashlee, I'm calling you to have 1.5 million followers on a social media platform, and you must forsake all else and kind of pursue that to the end of whatever. The invitation in that pillar is to find delight in and kind of this fire restoked and understanding that where we are is exactly where we are meant to be, and how do we reclaim that. And then finally, relationship. I just felt convicted really in the last two election cycles, the presidential election cycles here in the US. It kind of lends to accountability. A part of that accountability was, Ashlee, if you are going to speak publicly into or about something, you better be able to reground it in real and fleshed relationship. Like if you have no one, and this is me talking to myself, if you have no one with whom you can talk about this across a coffee table, or if there's no one that this issue you really want to talk about impacts in a real way outside of yourself, rethink that. Maybe go focus on the relationship first before you focus on your observation or sharing your opinion. And so the whole pillar kind of came out of that conviction that I wanted to centralize relationship, because Jesus did everything in the context of relationship. He didn't just talk about those on the fringes and the marginalized. He dined with them. He put himself in their way on purpose. There was a sense where his footsteps followed kind of this relational path, and I was struck by that. As we're speaking into the world, I want us in our pursuit of collective discipleship to follow the way of Jesus and centralize relationship in ways that the world just doesn't. It's a non-exhaustive list. There's clearly things that, I chose not to write about in each of those pillars, and given the pillars themselves. But for me, if you're not a theologian or an academic, and you can't just pull, from deep research or whatever, like I wrote this book for the everyday person to say, what might a discernment filter look like if I'm really trying to wrestle with what am I supposed to say? And am I supposed to say it right now? So those I feel like have been helpful for me, and I hope are helpful for those listening.
Yeah, I mean, as one who has read the book a couple of times now, I love the way you said it. You wrote it for people. The way I hear it is like you wrote it for us on the ground. It doesn't
Yeah.
live in the ethereal, academic, philosophical sort of, these are cool ideas. There is so much earthiness, one, just to your writing style, but the way you really pastor people. I mean, you really truly are a brilliant writer and thinker and Bible teacher, but like really felt pastored reading this book. So I would highly encourage our listeners, if you've not read Say Good. Ashlee, as we close today, folks are all over the place right now listening to this or watching this conversation. Maybe they're washing the dishes or running on the treadmill or driving to the next appointment. As I invite them to just take some deep breaths now, would you just give a final word of encouragement for our listeners as they, navigate the noisy chaos of our world and seek to experience God's deep, patient presence, and then find their own voice to speak goodness into the world that so desperately needs good? Would you just give a final word of encouragement?
Oh, I'd love to. I'd say that take courage, that your voice is not the measurement by which your worth is defined. Your voice is a part of who you are. It is not all of who you are. It is a tool given by the hand of God to partner with the hand of God to better this world as we march toward all things being made new. So take comfort in that you are invited, and yet God is big and can be beyond you, even if you still don't know what to say. So keep doing the good work. Bless you in your efforts to speak. As you get things wrong, which all of us surely will, may you find opportunity to be received in your humility, and may you be empowered by the Spirit of the living God that spoke creation into being in the beginning.
Amen to that. Thank you so much, Ashlee. Thank you seriously so much for not just your work, but who you are, the way you love and pastor people both near and far so well. I'm just really grateful for you.
Jay, likewise, my brother, I'm so grateful for the invitation, and I'm mutually encouraged by your mission and ministry in the world. So thank you so much for having me.
I hope this conversation with my friend Ashlee was helpful to you. I love her closing thoughts that you have a voice, but you are more than your voice. Your voice is a gift that God has given so that you might speak good into the world, a world that really is in need of some good. And may God, in His grace, by His Spirit, lead and guide you to those moments and those intersections and those places and spaces where He is asking you to speak goodness. And may He also lead and guide you by His Spirit to those moments when the best thing to do, when the godly Jesus thing to do, is to not say anything at all. As always, I want to close with this final prayer of blessing, a benediction over all of us. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, in this still moment, we pause to rest and relax into your presence. We thank you for the gift of this day, for the moments of light and levity, and all of your many graces, big and small. Help us to notice the goodness you weave in and through all things. Help us to reflect honestly on our missteps, to bring them to you humbly. We trust in your mercy, which is always healing, always restoring. Remind us of your nearness in our joy, our sorrow, and all our in-betweens. As we look to tomorrow, grant us the courage to surrender our plans to your care. Fill us with a trust that is grounded in your goodness, and open our hearts wide to your love, that we may carry your grace into the world. Amen.